Hi, I'm Bill Snodgrass, and in this basic photography video, we're going to look at shutter speed. So let's get started. So shutter speed is one of the three basic components in the exposure triangle, which is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Where ISO is the sensitivity of the image sensor, and aperture is the amount of light that's coming in. Shutter speed is exactly what it sounds like, the speed at which the shutter opens and closes. So the shutter speed designation is usually a fraction, 1 over something, and that is the part of a second which the shutter is open and allowing light to come in. For example, if your shutter speed is 1 over 200, then that means for 1/200th of a second the shutter is open, letting light come in, and then it closes and no more light comes in after that. The only complicated thing about shutter speed, as far as understanding it, is that it is represented usually as a fraction, and fractions always tend to make us a little bit, it requires a little bit of mental effort. The larger the number on the bottom, the smaller the amount of time that the shutter is open. It's that simple. So 1 over 200th, and it makes sense in low fractions, which we very rarely use, but 1/2 of a second is longer than 1/4 of a second. 1/200th of a second, therefore, is longer than 1/400th or 1/500th of a second, or anything like that. So that's the concept in a nutshell. The fraction of a second that the shutter is open. So the shutter speed can go up into full seconds, but for most of the time in photography, we're dealing with fractions of a second, and usually we want to get the shutter speed as high as we possibly can. Why? Well, shutter speed, the longer the shutter is open, the more chance that the camera is going to shake, or the model is going to move, or the subject is going to move. So the thing that we generally want to do in order to freeze motion is to have a fast shutter speed, and this is particularly obvious in sports, where we want to capture the athlete, usually capture the athlete and freeze them in the frame. Even in the swimming picture, the water droplets splashing out of the stroke are frozen in this image. So usually shutter speed, we want to run it up as high as we can, that's reasonable within the other limitations of what's going on, the amount of light and those kinds of things. And we also sometimes have to adjust shutter speed in order to manipulate depth of field, but that's another topic. So the old days, the rule of thumb was that your shutter speed always needs to be in excess of the focal length of your lens. So if you have a 50 millimeter lens, your shutter speed needs to be 50 or greater. Another aspect of that, it's kind of much more loose, is if you have the distance to your subject and double it. So if your subject is 3 meters away, then you want to double that to 6, and then add, multiply by 10. So 60th of a second if they're, within 3 meters. So the distance to the subject also affects, camera blur. And so now, these are just loose guideline rules. The better rule is to say, get your shutter speed most of the time. Get your shutter speed as high as you can, within the limits of your equipment and the situation and that sort of thing. So freezing the motion of an athlete, or even catching a droplet of water as it falls off of a melting icicle, that is done with high shutter speed. So that's kind of the general rule. I tell students when they're shooting sports, if you get under 500th of a second, you're probably going to have blurry sports action. And it depends. Obviously, some sports move less quickly than others, but a general rule that I try to tell them is stay at least at 500. 1,000 is better, and if you can get there, higher is better in almost every sport where you're trying to freeze the action. Sometimes, however, you don't want to freeze the action, and this is where using shutter speed creatively in your photography can kick in. So that's the rest of this video is going to be about sort of the creative use of shutter speed and a couple of situations. Now, when we're using creative shutter speed, we're usually talking about slowing the shutter speed down and doing something creative with it. If your intention is to slow your shutter speed down, your intention also better be to use a tripod almost all the time. Because once you get to a certain point, it is all but impossible. Even with image stabilization on, it's difficult to handhold a picture and then when the shutter speed gets down to a slow point. So tripod is almost an absolute essential tool in doing creative, slow shutter speed photography. Why would you do that? What are some situations where that would kick in? So first, one of the classic slow shutter speed is moving water. And I've got two pictures here. In this first picture, the shutter speed was 200 or something. It was a relatively high shutter speed. So in this second picture, the shutter speed was much slower. And you can see in the side by side that in the fast shutter speed, the ripples on the water are captured, and they're distinct and they're clear and they're obvious. With the slow shutter speed, the ripples on the water sort of smooth out, and we get more of a blurred, soft feeling to the water. So with a faster shutter speed, it seems hard. With a slow shutter speed, it softens it. So the slow shutter speed, the blurred water, the moving water picture is kind of a classic example. Another time that we want a slow shutter speed is literally, this would work in sports photography or any kind, where we want to depict the sense of speed and motion. And here's a picture of a car driving down a road, and this is our classic high shutter speed freeze the action shot. And it's a nice clear picture of the car. However, there is a technique where you have a slow shutter speed, a fourth of a second or an eighth of a second or a half of a second, and as the car goes, you snap the shutter and you pan with the camera. Now this is hard to do. This is a technique I've not done it very often in the past, and I'm not very good at it. And if there's a trick to doing it, I don't know what it is. I think probably using a monopod would help you stabilize that up and down motion, but you're still nevertheless trying to track a vehicle as it moves by, or an athlete as they run by, or a diver as they enter the water, and you're trying to capture the sense of motion. But by having a slow shutter speed and by following the subject with the camera, you get this surreal, blurry picture with the background is definitely clearly out of focus. Not out of focus. The background is definitely clearly blurred by the camera motion, but bits and pieces of the subject stand out clearly. And it's a very nice creative use of shutter speed. A third creative use of shutter speed is in using the camera, again on a tripod. The camera is stationary and fixed, and we're capturing light trails with a very long shutter speed. So in this picture, the shutter speed is 20 seconds, and it's nighttime, obviously. And as the cars drive through the view of the camera, you capture the lights, and you get these light trails. So these are just three things that you can do with a slow shutter speed that are creative. Number one is stationary camera, moving object, and the object that's moving, such as the flowing water, is blurry. Second is you're panning with the moving object, and you're getting this surreal kind of blurry motion effect. And third is a very, very long exposure with low light, and you get the light trails. So that's the basic understanding of shutter speed. It is the amount of time that the shutter is open, allowing light in. As a general rule, you want it to be as fast as you can so you can freeze motion, but there are times when you want to creatively use a slow shutter speed in order to make some sort of an artistic expression. So that's it for shutter speed. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy this video, please click the like button, share it with someone else who might also enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more photography videos as time goes on. And lastly, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. One more try. Or not one more try, this will actually be the first try. I should probably just, I don't know, cut this and start over.